Countertop guy, how you doing? Troy Rivers, how you doing? Pablo Pena, how you doing? Favorite guys, if you could just let me know how the voice sounds, the mic. Is it okay? Good. Okay. All right. Thanks, Countertop guy. So we'll be starting in just a minute or so. Have a few things that we'll go over and we'll talk about. What's up, Dad? Is your dad in here, Countertop guy? News junkie sounds good. Okay, thanks. Thank you, Dennis. Appreciate it. Thank you all for stopping by this evening. Hope everything is going well wherever you're at. Sounds south of the border. Really, a bit soft. Good day, good day. Hope everyone's doing fine. Zombie Apocalypse Bunker. Yeah, can you let me know the address? I might have to come in and join you out there. But so anyways, let's go ahead and get started. So hello again, everyone, and welcome again to another edition of Silver Bullion Television, SBTV. I'm your host, Patrick Vieira, and once again, we're live with our live stream. So a little bit of housekeeping. If you are new to this channel or you have not already done so, please do go ahead and subscribe. Click on the bell to be notified of new updates, and do give us a thumbs up if you like what we do. We really do appreciate your support. It means a lot to us. And you can also find us on social media. Our website is www.silverbullion.com.sg. We are in Singapore. On Facebook, Silver Bullion SG. On Twitter, you can find us at Silver Bullion PL for private limited. And if you have iTunes or Spotify, you can find us on just simply going to bit.ly/SBTV iTunes or SBTV Spotify. So those are the various ways you can find us. I do hope everything's going well for all of you. I know it's evening where you're at, so thanks for being here. So let's see. Countertop guy, can you talk about GC? The price is showing 1433 on. Oh, okay. I'm gonna have to gotta check into that one. But again, thank you all for being here. So first thing first, we'll go ahead and take a look at the gold and silver price. So we'll head on over to our website, www.silverbullion.com.sg. We are celebrating our 10th year anniversary this year, so we are going to have some very good deals from time to time, and I think we even have some pretty competitive prices right now with silver. And taking a look at silver, 1643 USD, basically no change yet from Friday. Gold is slightly up $3 an ounce since Friday. Both metals just waking up, I suppose. Silver gold ratio 86.6. Last week we saw it touch 85 range, so that was pretty good. I know it made probably quite a lot of you happy when you saw that. Take a quick look at other commodities and see how they're doing. Last week is a pretty decent week for commodities. We're seeing quite a few green, soybean oil, wheat, oats, lean hogs, feeder cattle, all doing okay. Not too bad, but we'll see how those are going to do a bit later on when U.S. market comes online. Okay, so Maori Morpheus, greetings from New Zealand. Kia ora, how you doing? Hope things are okay down in Aotearoa. Okay, so let me get into some of the news that came about. Late last week, we saw an article from, I think it was Zero Hedge, yeah, where JP Morgan, they believe the dollar could lose its status as a world reserve currency. I think if you're here, most of us, we already kind of have a good feeling or a good take on that already. Um, so Zero Hedge or JP Morgan first presented a chart created by JP Morgan's Michael Semblas, which showed very simply and vividly that reserve currencies, they do not last forever, and that in the not too distant future, the US dollar would also lose its status as the world's most important currency, since it is never different this time Well, that is true. No reserve currency lasts forever. And along with that, safe to say, no fiat currency lasts forever. We know the history of it. They all eventually go back down to zero. So we see in the 1400s, barely touching 1500 year uh, era, Portugal was the reserve currency. Then in the 1500s, we had Spain, and then 1700s, early 1700s, we had Netherlands and France and so on. You can see Britain in the early 1900s, and then along came the U.S. dollar. Eventually, this U.S. dollar is going to be replaced. We just don't know by what, and we just don't know when. And as Semlis put it back in January of 2012, when this chart is a bit older chart, but still it does serve a good purpose. And he says he's reminded of the following remark from the late MIT economist Rudiger Dornbusch, where crises take a much longer time coming than you think, and then it happens much faster than you would have thought. And for the most part, that is true. And I think we've been I guess I'll use the word warned, but we all know that this can't last forever, so we have been given time to understand this and to prepare. And this part here is quite interesting where he says perhaps it's not a coincidence then that in light of the growing number of mentions of MMT, and we're going to get more into MMT or the possibilities of MMT a bit later, mentions of MMT and various other terminal destructive monetary policies, pretty strong words, terminal destructive monetary policies that have been proposed to kick on the current financial system that can just a little bit longer, or they can just a little bit longer. That the topic of longevity of reserve currency status is once again becoming all the rage, and none other than JP Morgan's private bank asked in this month's investment strategy note whether the dollar's exorbitant privilege is coming to an end. So, JP Morgan, they've been kind of firing, little warning shots here and there and been giving us little inklings here and there as to what the future may hold. So it's not surprising, when words like MMT start to come out. So taking a look at some of your chat, which currency, Pablo Pina, which currency is next in line or slide to replace the current reserve currency? Gold upgraded by a crypto. Pablo, you know what? If my opinion, I'm gonna say it's gonna be a crypto, and I'm gonna say it's a sovereign crypto, a national crypto, a central bank crypto, whatever it is, and it's probably more than likely gonna be backed by gold. That's just my opinion. Could be wrong, but only time will tell. Question: ever heard of King World News Larry King? Yeah, I've heard of him. Larry King. He's an older guy. He's very good. Um, Middle of the road guy. Usually he doesn't take a position on anything. Gilbert Tessier. Hello from Canada. How you doing, Gilbert? Glad you could make it here. Would you buy 100 silver eagles and a buffalo, or just 200 silver eagles? Me personally, I would buy both. I mean, I would always try to get silver and then always try to get some gold. A lot of guys, what they'll do is they'll have their own personal ratio where for every 100 ounces of silver, let's say they'll buy an ounce of gold, or every 80 ounces of silver they buy, they'll buy an ounce of gold. So a lot of times people do have their own personal ratio that they'll go by. Uh, Morpheus Kyoto, brother, what do you believe silver be trading at by 2020 New Year's Eve based on crash and gold back? I think by 2020, I think it depends on a lot of things. I mean, if this MMT comes into play, but I think 2020 is going to be a pretty volatile year, mainly because that is a U.S. presidential election year, and I think if it's a repeat of what we saw in 2016, where a lot of people just cannot accept Trump being president for the second time around, I think these people they're really going to have a hard time with it. But So anyway, back to this J.P. Morgan article. Let me get to this part here. After the end of World War II, the U.S. accounted for the biggest share of world GDP at more than 25%. The number is brought to more than 40% when we include Western Europe powers. Since then, the main driver of economic growth has shifted eastwards towards Asia at the expense of the US and the West. China is at the epicenter of this recent economic shift, driven by the country's strong growth and commitment to domestic reforms. Over the last 70 years, China has quadrupled its share of global GDP to around 20%, roughly the same share as the US. This share is expected to continue to grow in the years ahead. China is no longer just a manufacturer of low cost goods, as a growing share of corporate earnings, and is coming from high value add sectors like technology. That part is true. You know, I mean, there was a time when China was just producing cheap knockoffs. It served their purpose, and they've moved into a bit more high tech areas, and they've been doing fairly well. They have been growing. I won't get into too much about how they are growing, considering, you know, is it things like IP theft and so on. Um, not going to get too much into that part of it. Uh, let's see. News Junkie. It's weird that I love silver, but I don't want the price to go up. Actually, News Junkie, you are probably like most of us. We want to see silver price go up, and then we want to see it come back down because we want to buy more. And then when we bought it and we're having it, we're holding it, we want it to go back up just to reaffirm that we did the right thing. So you're in the same boat with a lot of us. You know, we we buy it when it's down. We want it to go up. It goes up. We want it to come back down again. So it's a bit of a strange thing sometimes, the way we look at precious metals. But another article from Market Watch. This it's an opinion piece where this guy had a pretty interesting take on it, where gold isn't necessarily an investment; it's life insurance. And I think you probably hear this quite a bit, where gold, silver, it's not just an investment, but it's an insurance. So physical gold is an important asset when the world goes haywire. I think haywire is a very nice word. Um, so this author, he says he's always secretly wanted to work at a precious metals bullion dealer. Okay. He loves gold, silver, platinum. He loves them philosophically, and he just likes to look at them. They're shiny. But if you think about it, he says trading metals is a really weird business. So he says, say you're bullish on silver and you want to speculate on it, thinking it'll appreciate in price. You can buy an ETF. Yes, you can buy silver miners, but the easiest way is just to go ahead and buy bars and coins. Most popular coins from the US Mint, but you can get coins from other countries too. Most popular silver bars for retail investors are the 100-ounce bars, which are typically manufactured by one of a few silver refiners. Asahi is the new standard after Johnson Matthey. Okay, that's pretty much opinion. I know you folks will have different takes on that. But he says you can go to a bullion dealer and tell them what you want. Let's say a 100-ounce bar, and they'll charge you the spot price of silver per ounce uh, times 100 ounces, true, which is and plus a small markup. So this is still the very beginnings of it. But then he goes on to say, shiny rocks don't do anything. You aren't going to use them to sew a button, wash your car, paint your ceiling. They just sit there. You hold them for a while, and if the price goes up, you're supposed to sell them. That's what he says. I don't think that's what we do. But for the most part, people don't sell them. So there you go. And the price goes back down, and they end up in an estate sale, and the dealer buys them back at a discount. Paraphrasing Warren Buffett, someone watching from Mars would be scratching their heads. There's really nothing more useless in the world than a shiny rock, but we love them. Okay, so let's really see if this guy is in tune with why people really buy silver and gold. So he's not going to get too deep into it for philosophical reasons, for owning the shining rocks. But in recent history, the government has had a habit of abusing its currency. We know that. That's why we buy silver and gold. Governments abuse their currencies. We know that. Gold is an objective store of value, while the dollar is a subjective store of value. Okay. Big deficits will probably be monetized. Some lunatics want to inflict MMT on everyone. That is, again, true. Again, we're seeing more of this word now, MMT. Inflation is trending higher, measured and unmeasured. And we know gold is good for inflation, helps to fight off inflation. President Trump is going to take over the federal. I'm not going to buy this part. This seems too biased here. But anyway, his philosophy is things are going to get a bit dicey, and this is where gold is insurance. And I think for the most part, we agree with that. Where gold is meant to be a sort of insurance for us. So let's see. Markets getting juicy. Tom. Daryl from Denver, Zig Ziglar, Grayers. This man's predictions for the world are absolutely terrifying. King World News, February 17, 2019. Okay, Thomas Tubes, good evening, people. Okay, so we're seeing where, JP Morgan is seeing reserve currency is not going to be there forever. We're seeing where gold is insurance. But one other topic of news I want to touch before we get into the meat of the program is what's going on in Hong Kong. And I think this is important as far as the current trade wars going on, where earlier last week, Beijing suggests it could mobilize troops in Hong Kong if necessary. And that's pretty profound. So, asked how Beijing would handle a rise of calls for Hong Kong independence, a spokesman for China's defense ministry reportedly said a local Hong Kong law had clear provisions. That article stipulates that the Hong Kong government may ask for assistance from the Chinese military troops stationed in the city in the maintenance of public order. This is pretty interesting considered what happened last week, where we had those people in the white shirts that just started beating down on protesters. I mean, you'd have to think, okay, so what's going to happen? Hong Kong is going to ask for help, and here's China ready and willing to help and move in. I mean, it doesn't seems a bit odd. It's not. It seems to be playing out with some sort of an agenda in the background. But nonetheless, China's defense ministry on Wednesday indicated that the People's Liberation Army could be deployed in Hong Kong as protests continue in the semi-autonomous city. For over 2 months, political tensions in Hong Kong had escalated over a proposed extradition bill that would allow those arrested in Hong Kong to be sent to mainland China for trial. So Hong Kong citizens are concerned that their civil rights are slowly eroding under Beijing's control. That's pretty profound for them to say that they feel that their civil rights are slowly eroding. I find that to be pretty strong words. News Junkie, I'm really worried for the good people of HK Hong Kong. They shouldn't underestimate the government in Beijing. That's correct. That's absolutely correct. Chuck and Plata, would you ever consider doing a live stream with Salivate Metals? Sure, absolutely. Got no problem with that. Just hope I can keep up with him. He's really good on his take and his analysis of things. I followed him also. Absolutely. Wondering what will be the fallout from this Wednesday. This Wednesday, I think we're looking at that's the Fed should be raising rates this Wednesday, I think. But if I'm right, Elbow Sanchez, aloha, Elbow Sanchez. I know a Sanchez family back in Hawaii. So if it's one of you guys, how you doing? I know I think it's one of you guys. So how you doing? Cutting rates. Yeah, there you go. I think they are going to cut rates, and in fact, Michael Peno had something to say about that. But going back to China, Kyle Bass, he's been pretty active on Twitter, and he's had a few choice things to say about China that I think, in fact, I'm certain that we're going to see coming up in the near future. So here's one thing that Kyle Bass had to say.
In a CNBC exclusive interview, long-time China bear, Kyle Bass, who is founder and chief investment officer at Heyman Capital Management. Very good afternoon to you. Thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon, Wilfred. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Very well. And let's talk about the trade talks restarting. How optimistic are you that a deal is reached, let's say, this side of the new year?
Well, yeah, at first, you referred to me as a longtime China bear. I like to call myself a China realist. But I would like to, when you look at what the Chinese did in the last negotiation, it was about a 150-page agreement. And the night before both sides were to sign the agreement, the Chinese took 50 pages, the core of the agreement, and threw it away. And so they won't sign anything that's either measurable or enforceable. And Trade Rep Lighthizer is pushing something that is both measurable and enforceable, because every deal the Chinese have signed with us since their ascension into the WTO in 2001, China never lives up to their promises. So at some point in time, one of our administrative officials has got to hold their feet to the fire. And this is kind of the battle of cultures, because the Communist Party doesn't want to submit themselves to anything that's measurable or enforceable. I don't think an agreement can be had.
Okay, so Kyle Bass, he doesn't think an agreement can be had as far as the trade wars. And Lighthizer, who he had shown there in Rickard's book Aftermath, Lighthizer, he was in on some of the negotiations with China, and he put them to the test. And he basically told China, why should we trust you now, considering the history of everything that they said they were going to do that they didn't? So there's a little bit of history behind that. But Kyle Bass had one more interesting thing to say, which is now heading into the political arena.
When you think about the fiduciary responsibility of institutional investors in the U.S., how can you invest in a market where there is no rule of law? How can you buy a company that doesn't adhere to the same auditing standards as U.S. companies? How can you, as a fiduciary, own a variable interest entity in Alibaba when all you own is a small piece of paper that references something out of the Cayman Islands? Like, if you lose money there, you should be sued by whoever you're a fiduciary for, and you're going to lose that suit. And so I don't understand how fiduciaries can buy these things.
Okay, and so what Kyle Bass is kind of talking about is what was introduced by, hang on, let me close this down. I think it was Rubio. But there was an article that came out where Wall Street will be the next US-China battleground, and for good reason. I think something big is about to come out of Wall Street. President Donald Trump has made clear that the U.S. now considers China more a strategic adversary than a partner. While this shift in Washington's view of Beijing showed up first in trade policy, a new front has begun to open in capital markets. And Senator Marco Rubio, fired the first major salvo last month by introducing legislation that would increase oversight of Chinese companies listed on the American stock exchanges, delisting those that failed to comply with the new requirements. So days later, he queried U.S. index complier MSCI about its addition of domestic Chinese stocks to its global indexes, saying it risked exposing American investors to corporate fraud. And this is what Kyle Bass was talking about, the fiduciary duty. So Rubio's bill does seem to be gaining momentum, and if it is passed, it would represent a new front in the economic war with China and could have a dramatic impact on global investment flows. Such a law would weigh heavily on China-related stocks around the globe and could even have domestic political repercussions for President Xi Jinping. And the reason for that is because when Chinese companies, when they are listed on the exchange, a listing in the New York exchange has long been seen as confirmation that a company is indeed one of China's best and brightest. So it's a big thing for them to be listed on the exchange. But here's the thing. An American listing did not necessarily assure good corporate governance. U.S. regulators have never been able to examine audit documents from Chinese companies, as Beijing considers that practice a breach of its sovereignty and a risk to its state secrets. So you gotta kind of wonder on the things that they're doing with U.S. companies, IP, theft and whatnot. But then again, they'll go and say it's a breach of sovereignty and a risk to its state secrets if we have to comply with audit documents. So I don't know. It's a very strange thing. In fact, not strange. It's a very unfair tactic. So back to some of the questions. Modi Morpheus, Jim Rickards hates Bitcoin but says cryptos are going to be vital in the new global financial reset of currencies backed by the nation's natural resources, mainly gold and silver. Do you agree? I do. Um, like I say, I do think crypto is going to come into play, and I do think it will be backed by gold. Too many countries they're they're already invested in gold. Their central banks are, and I do have a clip that I was gonna play later on. I was actually gonna save it for next week. Maybe we'll save that topic for next week. Otherwise, I'm totally gonna derail from the student loan situation. But point noted. Point noted. Thanks, Modi. Um, Mikey's back. Yes, I'd like to make a large purchase to first purchase silver, gold, one of those. Or okay. Tom, it would be interesting if they don't cut just to talk about watching until September. True. Um, I've heard by several people, Mia Baller, even the ICS, that prices should push up at least 20 by the end of September. I don't know if that's a good thing or not, because I still need to get more silver myself. So I'm not ready to see $20 yet. I know a bit of kind of selfish on my part. Maybe a lot of you have been waiting to see that, but I still need to get more. Um, let's see, Gabriel Carballo. What if in a political move they did raise rates? You know what? That is a strategy by a tiny bit. What would do gold, silver, and sadly stuff? Well, it is a strategy in a sense that if the rates were raised, that would definitely be a huge signal to I would say to China that the U.S. economy is doing just fine with this trade war, and I think that would put added pressure on China. I mean, it would be a big gamble. I mean, if considering the economy, if it is slowing down and if it does need some help, it would be a big gamble if that were done. But it would also be possibly a strategy to tell them, hey, we're doing just fine. Look at that. We can even raise points again. And I do think that would put quite a bit of pressure on China if they did do that. But risk reward, I think it lies more on the risk side if they did that. Tom, he used to talk up the SDR, now cryptos. Tom, actually, he's still very favorable toward SDRs. The IMF is looking at cryptos, and they are considering coming out with their own form of SDR crypto. That's in also the book Aftermath. Um, okay, let's see. If they raise rates, U.S. markets would tank. Yeah, that's the risk part. That's the risk. So, it depends what he wants to do. I mean, either he can put more pressure on China at the risk of the markets, or he can lower and just keep the markets chugging along, and then long term, perhaps let China through the trade war see that the economy is still doing just fine. So I think it just really depends. Does he want to do it now, or does he want to do it later, sooner or later, type of a thing? Um, okay, but getting to last week we had Michael Pento, and since we're talking about the interest rates, this is what Pento had to say.
My data shows it's a 100% chance of a 25 basis point cut, and a little bit less about what you said about 50 basis points, about a half percentage, 50% chance or so, but 50 basis point rate cut. 100%. It's on Wall Street. If they don't cut rates on July 31st, then it's going to be a bloodbath in the stock market. Absolute bloodbath, in my opinion.
Bloodbath, strong word. That's a strong word. Yeah, the interview with Pento we posted last week. it was pretty good. Pento had a few things to say through his own analysis, and it started out by saying that from my sources, I was looking at a 65% chance of a 25 basis point cut. And Michael interrupted me and he said, no, 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 no. It's a 100% chance. So, and that seems to be the consensus all across the board where there is going to be a 25-point basis cut coming later on this week. So that's what I suppose we're going to be looking at. Um, Pablo Pina, good interview with Pento. He reminds me of Peter Schiff. Thanks, Pablo. Yeah, he's Pento is good. You know, he's very accommodating. He'll answer your questions and whatnot. Peter Schiff, he's just we've been trying. Can't seem to get Peter Schiff on yet, but we'll keep trying. But anyway, that question is: will rates stay the same, go higher, go lower, and by how much? So I think most of us probably would be in agreement. It's 25 basis point, and it's going to be a cut. So we'll see how this plays out. And another thing Pento had to say was when you look at the history of gold, you got to be pretty absent if you don't understand the history of gold.
Any argument against gold is totally ignorant of history. This country had an industrial revolution. We had stable prices. We had recessions. We had minor depressions that were quickly rectified because we kept that base money supply commensurate with, or nearly commensurate with, population growth plus productivity growth. And where's the argument that when we went off the gold standard in 71, is there an argument to be made that stable prices were the result? So the stagflation of the 70s, which is a result of going up the gold standard, that was stable prices? Was the collapse in stock prices in the NASDAQ bubble, or the housing bubble and the equity bubble in 2007, was that an example of stable prices?
Good point. Are they an example of stable prices? Good point. Good point. Sarcasm, of course, but politicians are the problem, not the gold standard. That seems to be the take with the gold standard from the gold community, where the gold standard is not the problem. The problem is politicians who are pandering for votes. They need to get back in office. They don't want to tax people. Uh, End up where a gold standard becomes debased somewhat, and then people will say the gold standard never works. I think most people are going to argue that and say no, it's the politicians that are the problem, not the gold standard. Um, let's see, Jay, thumbs up. Everyone helps the video in the search ranking. Yeah, that that would help. Like I said, we do appreciate it if we can get those thumbs up, but it's really your opinion. It's entirely up to you, and we appreciate it either way. Thumbs down, we know we need to do better. Thumbs up, we know we need to do better. Either way, we know we need to do better. Pento hit the nail. Yeah, he did. He always has a good analysis on things. And one thing, it's hard to hold a guy to timing when they give dates, because fundamentally they're spot on. They're a-okay. But timing, it's hard to nail. But Michael Pento, fundamentally, he seems to nail it each and every time. And we did talk about the debt situation right now in the country: student debt, auto debt, mortgage debt, and whatnot. And I had asked him, why don't we just pay everything off? MMT, right? Modern monetary theory. And this is what he had to say.
Yes.
We touched on this also, where student loan debt, auto loan debt, household debt, delinquencies, all going up. These debts, obviously, they're dragging the economy, making it harder for it to get out of a hole. What if we just forgave the debt? What would the consequences be if we just decided to do that?
Well, the government is the owner of a lot of the student debt,
Right.
and banks hold a lot of this other debt, credit card debt and auto loan debt. So I think it would be a devastating deflationary depression if you suddenly told the banks that their assets are worth zero. On the other end of that, government, you could just print more money, which I think this is what we're headed for. I think we're headed for a bout of stagflation like we've never before seen in the history of this nation. That's where I think we're headed.
Yeah. So I'll ask you guys: should some debt simply be forgiven via perhaps, let's say, a voucher? Meaning, let's say, if the government were to give people a voucher for mortgage, here's $1,000. It can only be used to pay your mortgage. Here's $1,000. It can only be used to pay down your student loan debt. Here's $1,000. It can only be used to pay your auto loan. I mean, if they did something like that, surely you and I were going to use it for that cause, and probably with that extra thousand, we would, I think, more than likely, depending on our situation, it may not be easy to save. We may have to put it back into the economy and possibly helping to kickstart the economy, get that velocity of money going. So, I mean, I think at some point we may eventually see these types of things happening with the government. Elbow Sanchez, I knew this was the channel for me when I saw that gold stash in the Pez container. Brilliant. Uh, you mean this one, right? Yeah. If you don't know, a while back we did one episode where on places where we can hide our gold or silver. So mine was a Pez container, and then you can see there's some gold in there after that. So that's what he's talking about. Okay, sorry about that. Excuse me. Um, it penalizes the people who pay their bills. That's the part. I mean, you're gonna get a lot of people who say, "Hey, I pay my bills now. You're giving this person for free." I mean, how do you appease that person? And probably the only way is you give that person that same type of a voucher. Where, okay, we gave that person $1,000 voucher. We're also going to give you $1,000 voucher. I mean, maybe that's one way to appease them. But I'm gonna start and get into student loans. And so first thing I'll do is I'll give a little bit of a background on what how students see it right now, and what they go through a bit. And I think overall, in the end, it's a little bit of an eye opener for us. So I'll go ahead and roll this clip on the student side of things.
Loan debt in the U.S. has hit a crippling all-time high. We have the facts. $1.6 trillion. That's how much 43 million Americans owe in student loan debt. The average college senior graduates with about $30,000 in student debt, according to a College Board survey. The question on their minds, is it all worth it?
Because honestly, how are students going to pay for it? We're going to.
Okay, that one's giving a little bit of trouble. Let me try and see if I can get that one to replay again. Just give me a minute. Bear with me on this one. Okay, hang on. Um,
Loan debt in the U.S. has hit a crippling all-time high. We have the facts. $1.6 trillion. That's how much 43 million Americans owe in student loan debt. The average college.
okay, I'll spare you from that one. Yeah, there's a bit of difficulty, but it talks about student loans, and how some people they graduate, they have over 200,000 in debt. They're not sure what they're going to do, how they're going to pay it off. Others they end up being homeless. And the way it kind of works, from what I understand, you you go in and you get an undergraduate degree, let's say. And it's a weird arrangement where when you graduate, you have an option. If you graduate, you have to start making your loan payments. If you graduate and you leave the system, you have to start making payments. If you graduate and you continue on, let's say to get your master's, then you don't have to pay the loan yet. So a lot of these kids, from what I understand, they will continue on because they're not sure how exactly they're going to pay their loan yet. So they figure, hey, you know what? Let me go ahead and get a master's, and then I should be very employable. So they'll go ahead and do that. And but at the end of the day, even with that master's, they see that it's difficult still to get a job, and they go into debt. And I wish I could have. I really wish I could have played that clip for you guys. But in the end, what's happening is politicians are going to pander to young people, and potentially bringing the country more towards socialism. At first, I didn't really want to say that, but that's the truth. I mean, when we have people like Sanders, like Warren, it is headed towards more of a socialist type of a system. So I'm curious to know what you guys feel on that also. Jesse, student debt should only fund high grade courses with a good payback ratio. And Jesse, that's part of the issue because you can get a loan. It's non-discriminatory and not just towards people, but even for whatever degree you want. If you're going to get a toenail clipping degree, you're still going to get funded for it, and that is part of the problem. But how did this all start? Because up until early 2000s, typically if you wanted to go to college, your parents had to pay for it. Maybe you worked hard for a scholarship. Maybe you worked hard to get a grant. But the thing is, if you did take on a loan, more than likely you got it from a bank, let's say, and you were vetted, and the bank basically put a risk profile on you, and sometimes you got your college funding, sometimes you didn't. Not everyone would get it. So how did this happen where banks no longer were assessing students? This is how it started.
For almost 2 decades, we've been trying to fix a sweetheart deal in federal law that essentially gave billions of dollars to banks to act as unnecessary middlemen in administering student loans. So those are billions of dollars that could have been spent helping more of our students attend and complete college, that could have been spent advancing the dreams of our children, that could have been spent easing the burden of tuition on middle-class families. Instead, that money was spent padding student lenders' profits. Now, it probably won't surprise you to learn that the big banks and financial institutions hired an army of lobbyists to protect the status quo. In fact, Sallie Mae, America's biggest student lender, spent more than $3 million on lobbying last year alone. But I didn't stand with the banks and the financial industries in this fight. That's not why I came to Washington, and neither did any of the members of Congress who are here today. We stood with you. We stood with America's students.
And so there you go. It was signed into a law of sorts where the government got into the business of student loans. And what happened then was the way it was brought to us was the banks are evil. Well, some of us may feel that anyway, but banks are bad. So we're going to remove the banks because the banks just want to make money. So we're going to remove the banks from student loans. And we, the government, we are going to go ahead and make sure everyone goes to college. We will pay for the student loan. But who's we? I mean, because the government is us. The government is you. The government is me. So when the government says we're going to pay for it, it becomes our burden. So I have another clip to explain this a little bit more, and hopefully this one will play well. But it's a pretty good clip on the explanation of student loans.
Student loan law right now is kind of a mess, to be perfectly honest. There is a lot of student loan debt out there. Total student loan debt right now is around $1.5 trillion. 44 million borrowers have student loans, and upwards of 70% of students graduating from college are graduating in debt.
The loan program makes loans to all undergraduates, regardless of the program that they study, regardless of their income background, regardless of whether or not they're likely to complete their program, and at 2-year colleges, community colleges, and at 4-year colleges. So it's not surprising then that if you don't have any criteria on the front end to screen out people who are unlikely to pay, then you end up with default rates that are somewhere around 20-25%. A 4-year graduate would typically leave college with around $30,000 in debt, depending on their circumstances. The federal government doesn't charge you late fees if you miss a payment on your student loan. They will continue to charge you interest on the loan, and if you go long enough without making payments, several months, it can affect your credit score.
So if you start falling behind in your payments, you enter a type of status called delinquency. For federal student loans, borrowers can miss up to 9 payments, or essentially be 270 days past due before the loan actually goes into default status. It triggers something called acceleration, where the full balance of the loan becomes due all at once, and that then gives the federal lenders more opportunities to pursue borrowers.
About 1 in 5 are in default, and that equates to, it's about 8.3 million people who are in default on a federal student loan. A 25% default rate, that sounds like a catastrophic number. That's the kind of number you would associate with a severe economic recession.
So for borrowers who default on federal student loans, the consequences can be pretty severe. For federal student loans that go into collections, federal law allows for massive collections costs and penalties that can be upwards of 25% of the outstanding principal and interest balance. Meaning that if you have $40,000 in federal student loans and they go into default, that balance can go up to $50,000 as a result of the default.
The federal government has additional collections powers that private entities don't have. So the federal government can garnish your wages without a court order. They tend to do this as a last resort, but it's actually done quite commonly. The federal government collects around $600 million a year through wage garnishing on defaulted federal student loans.
It's difficult to discharge student loan debt in bankruptcy because the bankruptcy code was rewritten to largely bar borrowers with student loans from discharging those loans. It requires something called an adversary proceeding, which is essentially like a trial in bankruptcy court in order to show that the borrower meets the undue hardship standard. A lot of borrowers are not able to meet that standard.
And the reason why Congress prevents you from discharging your loans in bankruptcy is that there's no underwriting on the front end for the loans. So the government makes loans to anybody and everybody. And so if you combined it with easy dischargeability for bankruptcy on the back end, would be a program that's ripe for abuse.
I think that the system is unsustainable. We need to make reforms that allow borrowers, or I should say allow students, to go to school without needing to borrow, or at least not needing to borrow as much. I also think that we need to strengthen programs for borrowers that are already in repayment so that they can have an easier time dealing with their loans without having to wade through a messy servicing and debt collection system.
I think people need to be more careful in the amount that they borrow, and the amount that they're going to pay off.
I think there are concerns about some of the potential costs of these programs, particularly if the cost of education continues to go up and borrowing is allowed to keep pace with the cost of education, and more borrowers are able to get their loans forgiven. At the same time, without some sort of reforms on the other side, on the cost side, just eliminating these safety net programs might cause a lot of lower income borrowers to not be able to reasonably access higher education at all.
Is it worth it to go into debt to pay for the education? I wouldn't necessarily be turned off by having to go $30,000 in debt if that's a difference between getting an undergraduate degree and not getting an undergraduate degree. Then generally $30,000 is definitely worth it.
Okay, yeah, so I see some pretty strong opinions out there. Trade school, absolutely nothing wrong with a trade school, and you're not going to go into debt. In fact, you're going to start to be on the plus side almost immediately. Ponzi scheme, you know what, hard to say. But Shane Clements, when did the boss and administrative minions of universities suddenly become worth millions in salaries? It's not like they're producing a high percentage of productive graduates. You know, Shane, that's hitting one of the nails on the head, because what happens is whenever you have government who is going to be paying for the bill in the private sector, usually the private sector is going to start to raise or jack up the prices, as we saw or we are seeing with tuitions, and the education is not getting any better. So that therein lies one of the problems, where tuitions, they are getting more expensive, but the education is not getting any better. For the military, on the military side, at least there's GI bills. I know when I was in, we had tuition waivers. Tuition waivers were basically, they will pay for your tuition and books, and that's it. But you don't get any other income. It's just strictly tuition and books, which for me worked. I mean, I didn't care to take on any other thing where I may have to pay back at that time, where So I went with tuition waivers, but of course there's also GI bills. If I recall though, I think GI bills, there are some stipulations where you may have to pay some things back. But when the government got involved in it, the intent, idealistically, it sounds good to young people. Sounds very good. And you have to understand, when this bill was passed, it was coming off of the Great Recession. So a lot of people were out of work. They needed to retool themselves. And a lot of it, a lot of their thinking was, hey, go back to school, get a degree, and then I can get a better job. But it didn't really happen. It didn't really happen for a lot of people. And that was the problem of government getting involved. Um, Elbows. If I were to do it again, I would have joined military. It's an option. Not for everyone, true, but it's always an option. Trades, Shane Clements, trades actually earn more than most graduates who are destined to become highly qualified waitresses. Shane, I agree. I agree. Plumbers, carpenters, electricians, they make good money. They make good money. Um, but now we're starting to see that, this idea that first came into place, that probably probably was meant to do good. I don't want to be, too sinister as to say this was a plan, this was a setup to enslave young people financially. I'm not gonna say that, but I'm gonna say maybe it had good intentions. Okay, let's just say it had good intentions, but now we're seeing that it's not turning out the way that it was hoped to be.
Today, and as we look at student loans, we look at a very different world than even just a few years ago.
For starters, obviously, we have a marketplace that is demanding post-secondary education more and more. Secondly, obviously, the Great Recession, I think, precipitated in as much as students were not able to find work after high school, that higher education became the route.
At the same time, people didn't realize the extent to which college costs were increasing even faster than the cost of healthcare. So we saw more and more students having to take out loans and becoming burdened by debt.
We had no idea how much borrowing was possible, what the consequences of excessive borrowing among a growing number of students might be, and we're paying the price today in terms of $1 trillion in outstanding debt, in terms of rising levels of per-student indebtedness, et cetera.
So times have changed, and I think our policy work really has not kept up with a lot of the changes that we've seen.
Okay, so yeah, there are a lot of changes that have been happening. I think, like I say, everyone, they went they took on their student loan thinking that there was going to be something for them at the end of the rainbow, but there was no pot of gold. Pot of gold is you guys. I know you have all your pots of gold at home, but there was really no pot of gold, and they're left holding this debt. And why are we even talking about this today? It's because, these things, they lead into MMT, modern monetary theory, where, it does look like it's already happening, where politicians are going to pander to young people, and it's the whole way the system works may end up changing. And for a lot of us, it's not going to sit well. For some of us, it's much needed relief. And this is why we're talking about it today, because it is going to go, or it does look like it's going to go the way of MMT. But some facts on student loan debt, I found it pretty interesting. 1.5 trillion, actually it's getting close to 1.6 trillion already. And student loan debt, it's the highest ever. Okay, we understand that. But hang on, the latest student loan debt statistics for 2019 shows how serious the student loan debt crisis has become for borrowers across all demographics and age groups. There are more than 44 million borrowers. Population of US is 350 million. So that's quite a good sized percentage of the population. And they collectively owe 1.5 trillion in student loan debt in the US alone. Student loan debt is now the second largest higher consumer debt only behind mortgage debt. I think that statement right there is pretty huge, and we may not have never really knew that or fathomed that, because we know what happened with mortgage debt back in 2007. Now we have mortgage debt and student debt. So I mean, we are definitely looking at a much larger crisis coming on down the road. Um, it's higher than both credit cards and auto loans. Borrowers in the class of 2017 on average owe just under 30,000, according to the Institute for College Access and Success. If you're a student loan borrower, the following student loan debt statistics can help you make more informed decisions. Okay, let me skip over that part. So here we go. Total student loan debt, 1.56 trillion. 44.7 million borrowers have student loan debt. The delinquency or default rate, 11.4%. They're 90 days delinquent. Cumulative in default or 360 plus days delinquent, 101.4 billion or 5.1 million borrowers. Direct loan in forbearance, 111.1 billion or 2.6 million borrowers. That's a pretty huge number. It's a very huge number. Student loan forgiveness comes in several forms. So these are ways where maybe the forgiveness can come about for the people carrying student loans. Two of the most popular types of student loan forgiveness are public service loan forgiveness and teacher student loan forgiveness. Now, teacher loan student forgiveness, a lot of times, this only holds true if they have an MBA. And the problem with that is, like I said, when a student finishes his undergrad, he has a decision to make. If he finishes school and goes to work, he has to start paying his student loan. If he continues and goes on for an MBA, which comes into play for things like a teacher student loan forgiveness, he is going to take on more debt. So it's worse than even a catch 22. If it's a catch negative 22, I don't know what else you would call this. Public service loan forgiveness statistics. How likely is this to happen? As of September 30th, 2018, or last year, 890,000 received loan forgiveness. Borrowers who submitted, or maybe I read that wrong, but borrowers who submitted applications, 41,221. Total numbers of applications, 49,669. Number of applications approved, 423 from all these tens of millions of borrowers. It's not likely that you're going to get your loan forgiven. 32,000 were denied from the applications that were sent in. Some simply because they were missing information. And borrowers who have received student loan forgiveness, 206. That's it. That's it. Total amount forgiven, 12.3 million, and we're looking at 1.6 trillion. So chances of your loans being forgiven, not very high, not very likely. Some questions. It is the everything. It's absolutely the everything bubble. Richard, I have no debt. Good for you, my man. Good for you. We're gonna have to put a gold star next to Richard's name. Everybody go to Richard's house, right? Shane Clements, are in Venezuela a wheelbarrow load of currency for a loaf of bread? Yeah, we're seeing it's coming pretty similar to perhaps the Weimar Republic. I mean, I think most of us know what happened there with the hyperinflation. Richard, I live in my okay. Only have a mortgage. Good, good, good. The best is a home equity line of credit. Got to build sufficient equity on the mortgage, though. Yeah, a lot of people do that. The only, I shouldn't say the only, but a risk that people have is if home prices should go down again, and a home was valued so high and you made a loan so high and then it gets revalued to be so low, that can be a bit of an issue. But I think, hopefully economies can hang on for a bit more, and then you can put that equity line to good use for yourself. I'm rooting for you. rebuild our great country. Jobs, jobs, jobs. Absolutely, we're going to need jobs. Shane Clemens in New Zealand, first year student is free to get more malleable minds into the government re-education camps. Hopefully, our socialist government is a single term. It's I tell you what, I mean, like I say, back in the day, I mean, I'll just be honest here. Not everyone is meant for college. Not everyone's meant for university. And there's nothing wrong with it. Some people, they're ready for college right out of high school. Some people, not until their latter 20s. Some people, not until their 30s, 40s, 50s. College is a different time. Not everybody is ripe at the same time to go to university. And some people, they just grow on a different tree. They're not ever going to be ripe to go to college. They see value in being a carpenter, being a plumber, a aircraft mechanic, whatever it is. And we need these guys. We absolutely need these guys as well. So there's nothing wrong with it. It's just a choice that people have to make. I mean, do you want to jump in and take on a debt and get a degree, go mainstream, let's say, and take a chance of would your job even be there? A job that can pay your bills, will it be there? Or go to a trade school, let's say, and almost immediately when you finish up, because a lot of these apprenticeships, you go to work during the day, then you go to school at night, and the school is basically paid for. It's free schooling, but you're working during the day. I remember for myself anyway, you would go to work, regular job, and 2 nights a week we would have to go to school. And then it took 5 years. And I tell you what, it was not an easy course. I mean, the end of 5 years, you have to take your test, you have to get licensed and everything else. And for us anyway, being the electrical code book, that is one thick book, and you had to know a heck of a lot of stuff. Same for plumbers, same for carpenters. So the trade school, it's not as easy, but I think you find guys that are a bit more passionate, guys who want to build things, do things, so they're more eager to learn. I'm not saying more eager to learn than traditional, not traditional, but more than let's say regular college. But I think it's because these guys, they are working during the day, so they can apply what they learn to their school. Whereas universities, you may not necessarily get to apply anything to what you learned until after you graduate. So it's a little bit different situation there. But so those were some student loan facts. I do have a few more student loan facts. Um, these are all pretty interesting. This is coming from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Okay, so this is a pretty credible report here. And some things are a little bit disturbing where, let me scroll down a bit. Um, Circumstances of young American consumers have undergone three unprecedented changes since the state of the 21st century. First, student loan balances and the prevalence of student borrowing have reached new heights, with the nominal aggregate student debt reflected in the New York Fed's Consumer Credit Panel, or CCP, growing from roughly 360 billion in 2004 to 1.2 trillion in 2016, and we know now already we're at about 1.6 trillion. But coming to here, this part here, okay, home ownership rates. Home ownership rates among young consumers fell drastically following the recession, with age 30 home ownership dropping from 31% in 2004 and 32 in 27 to 21% by 2016. Finally, the share of young consumers living with parents or similar elders has climbed, okay, while 33.5% of 23-year-olds and 25-year-olds lived with parents or similar elders. In basically, kids are staying home. They're not moving out. They're staying with the parents. And that's a little bit disturbing, because at the age when they should be looking into possibly settling down and getting a home and starting a family, they're at home. Uh, Home ownership measures are drawn from 2007 to 2015, representing the recession and post-recession period. Post-recession, it's interesting how they would define post-recession, because a lot of people will still say we've kind of just covered up the recession. We're still in it. But their empirical model indicates that the per capita of $3,578 increase in state's mean enrollment weighted public tuition per school from the years 2001 to 2009 is associated with a $1,628 increase in per capita student debt among all 24-year-olds. However, we find no change in educational attainment, whether measured by years of post-secondary education, college enrollment, or BA degree attained by 24, associated with this increase in tuition. These results suggest that American students' price elasticity of demand for higher education is quite low. As college costs increase, and we touched on this, American students do not forego education, but instead amass more debt. So even though colleges are getting more expensive, it doesn't deter anyone. They'll just take on the loan and go to school. And that is because they know that the government is going to pay for it. Um, Mikey's back. When I hire a helper to mix mud, I got to hear the same story about how they have a buddy that got a job making X amount, and all they have to do is, okay, don't quite follow down. Um, I was the most outstanding student. I was always outstanding in the halls. You are Carl. Okay, okay. But the thing is, okay, so politicians caused this mess. Now, what are they going to do to get us out of this mess? So, one interesting congressman, I think he's a congressman or senator, he says make colleges pay for the student loan debt. I know a lot of you guys are going to cheer now. Uh, but this guy, Senator Josh Hawley, a Republican from Montana, she's Montana, Missouri. I think Montana. Okay. Um, who pays when a student loan borrower defaults on their student loans? The answer might surprise you. Here's what you need to know. According to the latest student debt loan statistics, 45 million borrowers collectively owe more than 1.5 trillion of student loan debt. Approximately 11% of borrowers of student loan debt, which is at least 270 days delinquent on their student loans. Okay, this part we get. Um, why the issue of student loan default for federal student loans impacts you. Okay, all federal student loans are issued by the federal government. The federal government does not underwrite student loans, meaning that everyone who borrows a student loan receives the same interest rate regardless of their underlying credit profile. The goal is to increase access to higher education for more students. And this is why we're seeing that higher debt. But at the same time, borrowers naturally have stronger credit profiles than other borrowers, and a stronger credit profile typically means a lower probability of student loan default, while a weaker credit profile, which the government does not check but banks used to, a weaker credit profile typically means a higher probability of student loan default. So while the federal government wants to extend credit so that students can attend college, they also accept the risk that many of these borrowers could default on their student. Now, is the government accepting risk, or are we taking on that risk if it ever it should apply through a default? Some people can pay off student loans faster, others take a bit longer, some end up in default. Um, Basically, who bears the cost of these student loans? The answer, the federal government, and ultimately federal taxpayers like us. Okay, so a new proposal is coming out where let's make the colleges pay. Yeah, I know you guys are cheering again. If you default on your student loans, what about the college or university you attended? What's their financial responsibility? The answer, they don't have any. If you don't pay or repay your student loans, federal government essentially eats the cost, falls on our lap. However, it's possible the federal government could de-risk by securitizing these loans and selling them to a third party investor. I hope we're not talking MMT, but it looks like it could be along the lines of MMT. So here we have Senator Josh Hawley. who wants to change that. He'll introduce legislation that makes colleges and universities financially responsible if you default on your student loan. So he goes on to say that students shouldn't have to further, hang on, American students and workers shouldn't have to further enrich colleges by taking on a mountain of debt or mortgage their lives in order to get a good paying job. Yet we have a system that preferences students who want to attend a 4-year college over Americans who want to learn a skill. Talking about our trade schools again. This system protects higher education institutions that have been padding their endowment with taxpayer money while they raise tuition. So here we had President Obama saying it was the banks who are enriching themselves, who are padding themselves. But now we have a senator, fast forward 10 years or so, who's saying it's the colleges and universities who are now enriching themselves. So, yeah, someone's getting money through all of this. But Hawley goes on to say that, or his legislation states that it'll require colleges and universities to repay 50% of the balance for any defaulted student loans that students borrowed to attend their institution. His bill will further prevent colleges and universities from increasing the cost of tuition to help colleges fulfill this financial responsibility. In the case of default, it's time to break up higher education monopoly. Some people will even call this a cartel already at this point. So he the bill goes on to say that colleges and universities will push back. Of course, they will on this legislation. The argument, among others, could go something like: we provide a solid education to our students and prepare them to have successful careers. We can't control whether our alumni ultimately repay their student loans. We also can't be held financially responsible if our students do not earn enough income to repay student loans that they borrowed. So, I mean, you can see that there is going to be a bit of a battle on this front. But the one thing, he did mention the word monopoly, and almost likened it to the word cartel without saying cartel, and I'm going to touch on that shortly. Uh, Missouri, okay, Missouri, Montana, Missouri. Okay, at least we got the M right, right? Okay, hands-on, learn while you earn, out on the job. Mikey's back. Yep, that is true. I mean, hands-on. There's nothing like hands-on, hands-on learning. Uh, let's see. Will gold go higher than 1900 in the next recession? Um, you know what? Hard to say, but I do think it's one thing to look at the price. What will 1900 look like? Um, will the USD still be the reserve currency if it reaches 1900? Will I mean there's a lot of different factors to look at, more so than price. This is where I think the insurance portion of it comes into play more than price. Um, I would like to store my bullion in a desperate locker with a serial number to match, drilled and tested. Can you do this? Mm, send us an email. Send us an email. We'll see what we can do here, or I will I'll take it back to the guys and see what they think on this one. Separate locker meaning a safety deposit box, your own personal one. We do have that. You can actually have your own. Um, Shane Clemens, universities have to get away from bums on the seats and refocus on quality. Shane, I'd have to agree. I mean, by the time you get in university, you got to understand two things. It's time to get serious and buckle down, and it's a time to understand that you are in competition, and competition should make everyone better. The guy sitting on the left of you, he may be going for the same job, and you need to be able to compete, and that's one of the things I think nowadays might not it people may not be taking that serious, is that you're going to need to compete, especially where when you understand that the world has flattened, meaning because of the internet and things like that, the way we can transfer work and distribute work and whatnot. The world has become a flat place. I'm not saying flat Earth now, okay? So don't. I'm not saying flat Earth, but it's become a bit more flat, where a lot of the playing fields have leveled out, and people need to understand that you may be in New Zealand, but there's somebody in India who can challenge you and offer a better price, and that's kind of what we look at today as far as the business environment. Things can always be, or almost always be, outsourced for a cheaper, better, more competitive rate, and possibly at the same quality. And this is different now from manufacturing base, where Trump's intention is to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. This is a bit different, where on a smaller scale, maybe you just need uh, a specific job, or a one-time job, an ad hoc job, where you could just go ahead and job it out. So it's a bit different there. Um, Universities have to get away from, okay, that's the one we just read. If you don't hold it, you don't own it. You know what? I'm gonna say, I'm gonna have to disagree a bit on that. I understand what you mean. I do understand what you mean, though. Um, and I say I'm gonna disagree with that a bit, because I know how we handle things over at Silver Bullion, where if you buy something, it's yours, it's entirely yours, it stays there, it's under your name. We never touch it. It's just there until the day comes where you want to take it for delivery, or if you want to sell it, but it stays there. It's entirely yours. And I see this. I see it in the vault. I see the parcel numbers and things like that. And I know that they specifically belong to certain people. Now, I can't say that for other shops, because, frankly speaking, if you bought a monster box, like I say, and you store it with another company or vault, and let's say that bullion dealer, he's short of inventory, but another order for another monster box came in, don't be surprised if he takes your monster box and sells it to someone else, and in your cubby hole, it's just going to stay empty until the time comes when you want to take delivery. And then they may take out your neighbor's monster box and put it in your cubby hole, so to speak. And there you go. So when you come down and say, I want my monster box, they'll tell you, okay, we have it for you. But some guys, uh, it's a risk. Some guys, they may choose to operate that way, but for us, absolutely not. When you buy it, that's completely yours, and we will parcelize it. We will put tamper evidence seals, everything on it, lock it up. It's yours. We never go into it. If we're short on inventory, we reorder. We don't go ahead and sell it to someone else and then reorder, buy it, and then put it back. We don't do that, because you never know when a crisis may hit, and you expect your things to be there, and so do we. We expect your things to be there, and we're going to make sure it's there. Um, okay, so our next guest next week, Charles Hugh Smith. He touched on student loan debt and went so far as to call institutions a cartel, and I've never heard that before. But he makes sense in what he said, and this is what he had to say.
Then higher education is the same thing, that the university system has a lock on the credential, the issuing of the credential. And if you want a diploma, you've got to go to an accredited college. And of course, then they act as a cartel, keeping prices high. We don't really see any real competition. We're starting to see some now, where if you're going to get a digital, like an online classes only diploma, then the price drops from $20,000 a year to $6,000. But in my view, if we accredited the student and not the institution, then the institution would have they would lose control of that credential, and they couldn't act as a cartel to keep prices high. They'd have to really start competing by providing a better education for a lower cost.
Better education at a lower cost. I think that's probably one of the answers. As far as the getting the colleges and universities to pay off some of the debt if a student defaults, I think that's going to be hard to do. Charles Hugh Smith's suggestion where the student should be accredited as opposed to more of the university. Meaning, I suppose when we graduate, maybe there's a certain battery of tests that we have to take. I'm not sure because that's what a degree is supposed to provide. But I think if a student meets certain criteria, then does it really matter what school he goes to? Because there are certain universities that have some type of an accreditation, other universities don't. Sort of like a union, non-union type of a thing. But he makes a point where, if a person is accredited, I mean, if a person knows, then does it really matter at that point what school that they graduated from? But from the business side, of course, you want to see people from Harvard, Yale, Princeton, whatnot, if you can get them, as opposed to uh, Desert Cactus University, or one of those things. But I do see his point. I do see his point. So I think really it comes down to we are going to have politicians pandering for MMT or pandering students and looking at MMT where the government can simply say, hey, we're selling bonds. Um, Federal Reserve buys the bonds. And if these bonds were really meant to help pay for all these student loans, the Federal Reserve is buying it. They're going to pay it off 20, 30 years later. So what's the harm? That's part of the way MMT looks at it. Um, okay, Carl, the school should reach the golden rule. Whoever holds the gold makes the rules. Hey, that is true, and that's something to consider. Where we talked about a few weeks back, where if you look at China, Russia, the countries in Europe, and the IMF, they hold double the amount of gold that the U.S. has. So if ever they should decide to come together, I suspect U.S. may be in a bit of trouble because they do hold about twice the amount of gold that the U.S. has. Um, if you don't hold it, you don't own it, except in the same. Yeah, we're the exception. No, but seriously, it is something that we do take serious. Like I say, I see it every day. People's things are people's things, and that's just how we operate. We don't go into it. We don't touch it. It's yours. If it's yours, you're yours. And when you buy things, Singapore law, when you have that invoice, as Gregor Gregorson, our founder, likes to say, that invoice is a very powerful tool in that it states ownership. So if you have an invoice, it states that you own it, which means, again, we cannot go ahead and do whatever we want to do with it because even under Singapore law, you own it. That's yours. We can't touch it. Um, let's see. Uh, Education costs only skyrocketed once student loans became, that is true. That's absolutely true. When the government got involved, it went up. Stop government backed loans and watch how quickly tuition costs drop. You know what? I agree. I think if you, like I say, you take the government out of it, it's going to drop. And I think you're going to find colleges or universities being more competitive where they want their degree is going to be possibly more desirable than another university's degree of similar type because they have to, like I say, competition makes people better, makes even universities better. So if government gets out of it and now there's not that many people going to a university again, that university is going to have to tighten up and be the best that they can be because every other university is going to have to do the same thing and fight for that smaller pool of students where now they don't care. I mean, I'll just say it, they don't care. They know there'll always be a supply of students. So they don't need to worry about being the best. Um, Thomas, good point. Like NASA, $14,000 toilets. True. Same with doctors. Absolutely. BK, some world class dentistry can be found in Thailand at a fair price. Yeah, I hear people go there for like cosmetic dentistry and things like that. Um, I'm about to wrap up, but what would happen if government forgave student debt? I mean, I think that's we touched on it, but let's just kind of go into it just a little bit more on that. If there's an article here where student debt forgiveness sounds good, but what happened if the government actually did do it? Uh, 1 in every 6 Americans owes money on a federal student loan. So here we come into the politics of it all, where Elizabeth Warren, she would forgive up to 50,000 in a student loan for 42 million Americans. Her plan would cancel up to 50,000 in debt for people who have household income of less than 100,000. The plan wouldn't take away debt for people with a household income above 250,000. Those in the middle would have loans canceled based on how much they make. The more you earn, the less would be forgiven. Warren said she'd institute a tax on the wealthiest Americans to come up with the money for this. So here we go, a little bit of this socialism starting to come into play. Bernie Sanders proposed a seemingly simple plan: cancel student debt borrowers for everyone who carries it. He says it'll save $3,000 per year for the average borrower. Sanders says he'll create a Wall Street speculation tax, taxing stocks, bonds, and derivative trades. So these plans to eliminate debt come in tandem with proposal to decrease or eliminate college costs, which prompt questions of their own. But what exactly might happen if the government simply wiped out the loan? Um, so, okay, let me just touch on this again. Eliminating all student loan debt would cost somewhere around 1.6 trillion, though the exact cost is anyone's guess. Sanders says in his plan, which includes making all public colleges in the U.S. free, would cost 2.2 trillion. Warren's overall education plan, including free public college, would cost 1.25 trillion. Let me see if I can find this one part that kind of summed it up. I believe it's here. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, yeah, it's not on this one, but the last one I wanna talk to you guys about is this article from Zero Hedge. Um, let's see. 70% of the cities and surrounding areas with the highest median loan balances are located in the South. I think that kind of says something. So he has this map here. The red spots, it's the higher debt areas. So we're really seeing them on the southeast coast. And you gotta wonder, why does it seem to be concentrated in this area? Look up the demographic of the people that live there, and you'll probably find out why there's a concentration there. Washington, D.C., median balance 29,314. Atlanta, 28,000. South Carolina, 27,000. So we're seeing that this is the average of what people in these areas owe, and it's pretty substantial. And then when you look at other places, where 10 places with the least student loan debt: Texas, California. This is interesting to me. Ogden, Utah, Salt Lake City, Utah. So you have a couple Utah places that are in there that they don't have much student loan debt, but it's the fastest growing consumer debt in the country. And we know that part already. And millennials will be most impacted in the next recession, and that's basically what it comes down to. They're going to be impacted the most, and it does look like this is going to be an MMT play come our next election cycle. Um, let's see, debt jubilee, not only just for student loan debt. That's the thing. If they go into that, everyone is going to be saying, "Hey, what about me? What about me?" And we can't deny that. Judiciary will only allow what happens to depositors if a student loan debt is forgiven. Bit like ETFs, there are two sides to a trade. Shane, correct. That's the thing. There's a concern for people because they're going to go after so-called rich people to pay down the debt. and that's not going to go well. So I think the next thing they're going to look at is MMT, where, like I say, government's just going to issue bonds. Federal Reserve is going to buy the bond, which is already happening, and then when the Federal Reserve pays for that bond, government will take that money and go ahead and pay down student debt. Or, like I say, give people vouchers. This is a voucher for student loan. This is a voucher for your car. This is a voucher for your mortgage. If they do that, then I think you take away more of the animosity from people who says, "Hey, I paid my student loan. Why does this person get a freebie?" Well, we'll give you a freebie also. We'll give you a voucher for this or for that. So, I think, if it happens, then, as Jim Rickers pointed out, the MMT theory, it actually can work, but the thing that can actually make it fall apart is confidence. People would no longer have confidence in the government or in the U.S. dollar if we were to do that. I mean, can you imagine a country saying, "Hey, we got a trade deficit or something like that. Can you pay it off for us?" I mean, where does it stop, right? So I think MMT, it's a good idea. It's a very idealistic but realistic. I'm not sold that it can be a something that can really be done. Um, let's see, NFK. What would your minimum amount of money? What would your minimum to borrow? Like, at what point is it a good idea other than storing at home? Okay, you know what? That's it's a good question. I think it's a personal question. I personally think, have at least 6 months salary on you, and but I do also realize, if let's say, for in the U.S., you do have to expect that or understand that things are not going to go well, and so your question becomes, do you want to keep your gold, your silver with you, or do you want to put it in a safer place? Um, but looking at it, I say, have at least 3 to 6 months salary on you. Have some for opportunities that are going to come up. Meaning, someone may have to sell a business, someone may have to sell a condo, a piece of land, whatever it is. You're going to have opportunities, so have some with you to handle the opportunities, and because it is going to come to an end, meaning that whole chaos situation, whatever it is, that transition period, it's going to come to an end. So you want to make sure that when it does come to an end, you position yourself through that transition to put you in a better place once a new monetary system comes into play for everyone. So it's a personal decision, but have at least 3 to 6 months salary with you, and then some for opportunities. But I would, me personally, I would consider having some outside of my own country, and that's because if things really get bad, you don't want to have it all there. You want to make sure you at least give yourself a chance by having it in a different jurisdiction. Let's see. I think gold will float until recession is announced, and it'll spike. It could. Um, How profitable are those printing machines if they're not printing? Federal Reserve printing press? No, no. Gold for all, gold and silver for those who don't have debt. Yeah, I mean, it's it's your insurance. I mean, it's something you should hold. Something you should hold. Let me check on one message here real quick, and then it's okay. Um, okay, so there was that one question about Jim Rickers doesn't like Bitcoin, but he is talking about crypto. He's actually talking about there may be some type of a private coin, which let's say China and Russia may create a gold-backed private coin. They have to invite you to be able to use this private cryptocurrency. And then there's others like Danielle DiMartino Booth. We had a chance to speak with her a few months back, and I had asked her if she thinks the Fed will create a crypto coin, and she said for national security reasons, the Fed will have to create a crypto coin. And for when I hear things like this, it's very easy to understand that these guys are going the way of a cryptocurrency, and more than likely they're going the way of a gold backed cryptocurrency. So getting back to the point where Rickard says he doesn't like Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies, he's looking at it from the viewpoint of he foresees the SDR having some type of crypto SDR, or that private coin between, let's say, China's private coin, or Russia's private coin, or whatever country's private coin that they may come up with, where they have to invite you to be able to use their currency or their coin. So when you hear things like this, you realize this is completely different from where we are today, and that's why I say, we're here today, we're going to be here tomorrow. It's this transition point of getting from here to there. That's the important part. I mean, we don't know what they're going to come up with, but we do know they are going to come up with something. So it's that transition. You want to position yourself to be able to make it through that transition, because that's where, people are going. You're going to make it or break it during that transition. So this is where you want to have your enough silver and gold to get through that transition. If the student can't pay, send them to the okay. Gotta adjust what we don't feel. Bankroll media convinces you inflation is so okay. So anyway, that'll pretty much wrap it up. Try and pick up more on MMT. Understand it a bit more myself as well. Let's take a look at what politicians are saying about MMT, because that is going to be one of the things that's going to be used to persuade votes. So the best we can try and do right now is to understand it, the good and the bad of it. If we do it, what happens later on? If we don't do it, what happens later on? So, hopefully this was a bit informative for you. Not necessarily something where we blame students for trying to get ahead or trying to better themselves. It really comes down to government getting involved again in something that private institutions handle better, and now creating a very huge mess that we are all going to have to pay the price for, to a point where it may even change an entire democracy or republic or whatever it is into some other form of government. So again, if you can learn about MMT, myself also, and just understand what it means, what it does, what it can't do, and where it can lead to. And again, it's not the student's fault. Maybe it's not the student's fault, but it's just really government once again getting into the things that the private sector could handle a bit better. So, we're, like I said, always say, we're in this boat all together. The more we can all learn, the more we can all help each other or help our friends around us. Take a few more questions. We don't need just what we don't need. Fiat, Bitcoin. Okay. Vacuum clean. Okay. I'm tired of always having to pay the price of so-called government. That's what it comes down to. That's really what it comes down to. And you're going to get people who are tired of the government, and you're going to get people who absolutely love the government. And if you love the government, more than likely it's because the government is giving you something for free. And if they are getting it somewhere. Either they're getting it from somewhere down the road, or they're getting it from you today, but they're going to get it from somewhere. So it's, like I said, something we need to pay attention to. But until then, as always, we don't know what's really coming around the bend, but as much as possible, silver up, saddle up, and just be ready for whatever's coming down the road. I'll see you guys next week. Take care.